The metal tray hit the table with a clatter, and the smell hit him first. Half-rotted vegetables, grayish slop that could barely be called food. Jamal's stomach twisted. Around him, hardened inmates shoved the same mushy mix into their mouths without a flinch. But survival in this place wasn't about taste. It was about knowing what was safe, what wasn't, and who would snatch your portion if you hesitated. Jamal froze for a split second. Then a tattooed hand reached across the table, grabbing half of his slop before he could react. He yanked it back instinctively, heart hammering. Eyes met across the table. That stare didn't just ask a question, it threatened his life. In prison, every meal is a battlefield, and slop is the weapon. How do men survive on this mushy, gray slurry day after day? How do they avoid sickness, fights, and humiliation while eating the very same food that breaks so many? Jamal is about to find out the hard way. This channel is created for educational, documentary, and informational purposes only. All stories, events, and individuals discussed are based on public records, news reports, court documents, and documented sources from the United States, United Kingdom, and Canada. The content presented does not promote violence, crime, or illegal activity. Any opinions expressed are intended for analysis and commentary and should not be interpreted as factual accusations against any individual or institution. Some visuals, reconstructions, or narratives may be dramatized or simplified to enhance storytelling clarity while remaining faithful to the documented facts. Viewer discretion is advised, as this channel may contain disturbing themes related to crime, incarceration, and mental health. This channel does not provide legal, medical, or professional advice. All rights to referenced media belong to their respective owners, and no copyright infringement is intended. If this story opened your eyes, don't let it end here. Hit like so this video reaches more people who need to see the truth. Subscribe for real crime and prison documentaries you won't see on mainstream media. And comment below, do you think the justice system failed here, or did it get it right? Jamal arrived at Eastbrook Correctional Facility in the dead of winter, shivering under a thin jumpsuit that smelled of disinfectant. His first night had been sleepless, filled with the echoes of doors slamming, guards shouting, and men screaming in the distance. Tattoos, snaked-up arms, across necks, even on hands pressed against steel bars, silent warnings written in ink. He hadn't eaten since he left the intake center that morning. By the time the first meal came, the slop had already formed a layer of gray skin on the top, as if it were alive. A mix of watery vegetables, unidentifiable protein chunks, and thin soup. He'd heard stories, some of them rumors, some horrifyingly true, about food poisoning, hidden needles, and rats falling into the trays. Jamal glanced at the other men. Some stared blankly at the ceiling. Others shoveled the gray mush into their mouths with a hunger that seemed almost feral. One man, a giant with a sleeve of tattoos spiraling down his arm, whispered to another, "You don't touch the skin. That's where it gets you." Confused, Jamal leaned closer. The skin on the top wasn't just congealed food, it was a shield. Inmates told him it protected the portion beneath from the occasional fly, mold, or even deliberate sabotage from other prisoners. Some men would carefully lift the top layer and eat only what was underneath, tossing the rest or saving it for a friend who'd earned their respect. It was survival strategy, nothing else, and Jamal needed strategies. The first bite made him gag, but he forced it down. He had no choice. Around him, men with hardened faces, each tattoo a story of battles fought and crime survived, kept watching. One flick of the eyes could decide if you ate in peace or got your tray emptied into your lap. By the second day, Jamal learned about slop hacks. Men would collect every tiny crumb from the floor, mix it in, and call it enhanced protein. Others had developed a method of pouring a bit of water over the mush, creating a thin soup they could swallow quickly to avoid chewing. Chewing too long was risky. Slow eaters got attacked. And then there were the guards, always present, watching. Sometimes they seemed bored, sometimes deliberately cruel. A tray dropped by mistake wasn't an accident. You drop your food, you drop respect, one inmate explained. Respect in prison was worth more than slop or even freedom outside. By the third meal, Jamal was already strategizing. He noticed patterns. The guy with the skull tattoos always sat near the corner and ate last. He never spoke. If you didn't make eye contact with him, he didn't bother you. But if you did, you'd better have a reason. Some inmates guarded their slop like treasure. Jamal learned to nod politely, keep his eyes down, and sometimes offer a small portion from his tray as a peace offering. It bought him time. Hunger didn't just make you weak, it made you dangerous. The men around Jamal weren't just eating. They were surviving a complex web of alliances and threats. He realized quickly that learning who to trust, even slightly, was as important as learning how to swallow slop without gagging. By the fourth day, Jamal had started experimenting with mix-ins, small additions from commissary items or leftover bits he'd bartered from other prisoners. It wasn't much, a spoon of peanut butter here, a tiny bit of sugar there. But it transformed the slop into something manageable. A taste of normalcy, a moment of control in a place where everything was controlled by someone else. Then came the first real test. During lunch, an inmate with a jagged tattoo across his forearm accused another of stealing a portion of his tray. Voices rose. The guards didn't intervene immediately. Instead, they watched, arms folded, fists clenched, slop bowls rattled. Jamal ducked lower in his seat, trying not to be noticed. He understood. The fight wasn't about food. It was about dominance, hierarchy, survival. A lesson learned too late could cost a broken jaw, or worse. By the end of the first week, Jamal had a new understanding. Slop wasn't just food. It was a language. Each gray lump, each skin on top, each careful nibble communicated something. Strength, weakness, caution, respect. To survive, he had to learn the rules without them being spelled out. As he lay in his bunk that night, exhausted, he realized the next meal could be a simple tray or a deadly challenge. And tomorrow, the slop would arrive again. Morning arrived with the same clanging chaos as yesterday. The metal trays slid out of the slot in the dining hall, each carrying the same gray, lifeless mush. Jamal's stomach tightened. He'd survived the first week, but today felt different. Today, he wasn't just a newcomer trying to avoid trouble. He was on the edge of learning how dangerous food in prison could really be. He noticed the man from the corner of the cell last night, the one who had growled in the dark, sitting near the middle of the hall. His eyes were sharp, scanning every tray, every movement. Tattoos crawled up his neck, across his hands, onto his knuckles. Jamal understood immediately that this man wasn't just observing. He was marking weaknesses. A split second of hesitation, a misstep while lifting the slop's skin, and someone like him would notice. Jamal carefully lifted the skin on his tray, peering at the gray mush beneath. Other inmates were already using techniques he hadn't seen before. One man with full-sleeve tattoos of flames scooped up the slop and combined it with bits of bread he'd hidden in his pocket. Another carefully dipped a piece of raw carrot he had stashed from breakfast into the slop, as if improving its flavor would somehow protect him. He realized that survival wasn't just about swallowing the food. It was about creativity, improvisation, and small alliances. Across the hall, a small group of inmates whispered and traded bits of food. Jamal noticed them immediately. They weren't just sharing. They were building trust, creating micro-alliances. One slip-up, one rumor, and those alliances could crumble into violence. He wanted in, but he had no idea how to start. It wasn't long before the first problem appeared. A tall inmate, covered in jagged tattoos like broken glass, slammed his tray onto the table and glared at a smaller prisoner. Words were exchanged, insults flew. The tall man's tray tipped slightly, gray slop spilling onto the floor. Other prisoners edged away, careful not to get caught in the chaos. Jamal froze. If he made a wrong move, his tray could be next. Then the tall man grabbed the smaller prisoner's tray. Fists clenched. The hall fell into a tense silence. The guards were present but unmoving, arms folded, watching like spectators at a street fight. The fight wasn't just about stolen food. It was about dominance, respect, and survival. Jamal realized that every bite, every maneuver at the table, had consequences far beyond hunger. By the third meal that day, Jamal had started experimenting cautiously. He had managed to trade a small portion of his slop for a strip of processed cheese with a man whose tattoos spiraled up his arm in sharp, black lines. It wasn't much, but the taste of real food gave him a flicker of hope. That little victory reminded him why prisoners fought to survive even when the conditions were awful. Then came the whispers about the secret stash. Some inmates had learned ways to hide small food items, packs of sugar, small cans of tuna, or peanut butter from the main trays. It required cunning, timing, and trust in someone who could be a friend or a threat. Jamal watched closely as two men, their arms tattooed with serpents, carefully slipped a small container under the table. Later, he realized that food wasn't just about nourishment, it was power. Whoever controlled it had leverage over others. By the fourth day, Jamal had his first brush with real danger. A tattooed man approached him while he was lifting the skin on his tray. "You knew, huh?" he said, voice low, almost a growl. Jamal nodded, trying not to show fear. The man leaned closer, eyeing the gray slop. "You need to learn fast. One wrong move, and this," he jabbed at the tray, "could be your last meal, or worse." Jamal understood instantly. The threat wasn't subtle. Survival in this place required learning invisible rules. Who to trade with, who to avoid, and how to manipulate the slop itself to show strength, not weakness. He began watching closely, noticing how certain men ate quickly, others slowly, some always saved a portion, some offered a bite to someone stronger to gain favor. Every small act was a signal, a code and a language he had to decode. As the days passed, Jamal also discovered the risks of sabotage. Some inmates intentionally contaminated food, putting hair, dirt, or worse into someone else's tray. These were men with tattoos marking them as veterans of prison life, and they didn't hesitate to teach newcomers the consequences of carelessness. Jamal learned to check every tray meticulously, inspecting the skin, the color, even the smell. One wrong bite, and illness could strike immediately. In a place like Eastbrook, medical attention wasn't a guarantee. By the end of the week, Jamal had started forming his first alliance. A man named Ricardo, covered in tribal tattoos along his arms and chest, had offered him a small portion of hidden bread in exchange for a favor later. It wasn't friendship, it was survival. Together, they devised a system. Jamal would watch the hall for danger, while Ricardo manipulated the food stash. In prison, trust was fragile, but calculated partnerships were sometimes the difference between life and sickness. That night, Jamal lay in his bunk, stomach tight, thinking about the lessons he'd learned. Food wasn't just a meal, it was strategy, weapon, and social currency. The gray slop might have looked disgusting, but it carried a story, a test, and a challenge that he had only begun to understand. And as he drifted into a restless sleep, he knew tomorrow would bring another test, a bigger one. A fight over a tray had already been rumored. Whispers of sabotage floated through the cell block, and alliances would be tested. The gray mush on the tray wasn't just food anymore. It was survival itself. The next morning, the dining hall smelled worse than usual. Gray slop steamed in the metal trays. But something about the air made Jamal's stomach churn more than the food ever could. Whispers ran like electricity through the room. Someone had tampered with the last meal, a rumor of poison, a threat, a warning. Eyes flicked constantly, scanning, measuring, sizing up weaknesses. Tattoos glinted under the flickering fluorescent lights, symbols of experience, violence, and survival. Jamal moved cautiously, lifting the skin on his tray, as usual. Ricardo was already in position, scanning for trouble, signaling silently with a nod that it was safe to eat. But safety in Eastbrook was never guaranteed. Not a single bite could be taken without awareness of the unseen rules that governed the room. Suddenly, a commotion erupted near the back. A man with jagged tattoos running down his forearms had overturned a tray and was shouting at a younger inmate. Slop splattered across the floor, and several men lunged toward each other. In a flash, Jamal realized this wasn't about food, it was about fear, dominance, and territory. Inmates learned fast. Control someone's meal, control their day. Ricardo grabbed Jamal's arm. "Move," he hissed. Together, they sidestepped a flying tray. Jamal's heart pounded as he watched the chaos unfold. One wrong move, one glance in the wrong direction, and he could be next. After the fight, the guards finally intervened, shouting and swinging batons. Trays were confiscated, and men were pushed roughly back to their cells. Jamal clutched his stomach. Hunger gnawed at him, but he had learned the first rule of survival: never eat in haste when danger looms. Back in the cell, Jamal and Ricardo went over the day's lessons. Some inmates had secret stashes of food, hidden under bunks or behind loose bricks in the wall. Others hoarded commissary items, trading slowly, quietly to gain influence. Jamal realized he was witnessing a small ecosystem, a survival network built entirely around controlling access to food, maintaining strength, and manipulating fear. That night, Ricardo taught Jamal his first secret. "The trick," he said, "is not just surviving the slop. It's making the slop work for you." Ricardo opened a small container hidden under the mattress. Bits of processed meat, sugar packets, and crumbs from a contraband bread loaf. Together, they mixed it into Jamal's tray. The gray mush turned slightly brown, the smell less offensive. For the first time, Jamal felt a small sense of control. But control came with risk. The next day, Jamal witnessed what happened when someone pushed too far. A tattooed inmate tried to claim part of another's tray by force. Words escalated to shouts to fists. Slop flew across tables, bowls shattered, and a man's eye was cut by a metal edge. Guards intervened only after the damage was done. The room smelled of fear and iron. Jamal felt his stomach churn, not from hunger, but from the realization that survival in this prison meant constant vigilance. By midweek, Jamal had learned the unspoken rules of eating in Eastbrook. Eat quickly but cautiously. Observe who controls what portion. Never look a dominant inmate directly in the eyes unless you have a reason. Protect your tray. And if you can, barter for small additions to improve the slop. Sugar, cheese, tiny bits of meat, because these small acts could save your health and build fragile alliances. One evening, Ricardo whispered about the ultimate risk: smuggling. Some inmates had mastered the art of hiding food in their clothing or body cavities to avoid the slop altogether. It required stealth, timing, and nerves of steel. One mistake could lead to solitary confinement, or worse, a violent beatdown. Jamal's heart pounded just thinking about it. The gray mush wasn't just unpleasant. It was a trap, a test of patience and intelligence. The next day, a new player entered Jamal's life. A man with full-sleeve tattoos of black roses approached him, silent but commanding attention. "I see you've been learning," he said quietly. "You want to survive? You'll need to know more than just the slop. You'll need strategy." He handed Jamal a small, folded note, directions to a stash of food hidden behind a loose brick in the laundry room. It was an invitation or a challenge. Jamal understood immediately. Food in prison was never just food. It was power, currency, and sometimes a ticket to safety. As he tucked the note into his pocket, Jamal felt a flicker of fear and excitement. Every bite, every tray, every careful interaction carried consequences. Survival wasn't guaranteed. And as he returned to his bunk that night, staring at the concrete ceiling, he realized the gray mush he once hated had become a symbol, a test of endurance, cunning, and instinct. Outside, the prison was quiet. Inside, the world revolved around trays, whispers, and invisible hierarchies. Jamal knew the next day would bring a new challenge, perhaps a fight, perhaps a betrayal, perhaps an opportunity. The gray slop, once just food, had become the ultimate survival test. And somewhere in the shadows, the man who had growled at him the first night was watching, waiting. The morning bell rang, but it didn't wake Jamal. He had been awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the note Ricardo had given him the night before. Behind a loose brick in the laundry room, there was a hidden stash of food, something he had never dared hope existed. But retrieving it wouldn't be simple. Every step in Eastbrook was calculated. Every move was watched. One mistake, and he could end up beaten, sick, or worse. When the trays finally slid into the dining hall, Jamal approached cautiously, keeping his eyes low. The usual chaos greeted him. Men shoving, shouting, gray mush spilling over tables. The rules were clear. Move fast, move smart, and keep your tray close. He noticed the black rose tattooed man from last week sitting across the hall, watching silently, evaluating. Jamal nodded slightly, signaling he was ready. After lunch, Ricardo leaned close. It's now or never. You get that stash, you'll have a week of real food. But don't get caught. He handed Jamal a small piece of bread to distract any hungry eyes along the way. Jamal slipped it into his pocket, heart hammering, and moved toward the laundry room, careful not to draw attention. The corridor leading to the laundry room was quiet, almost eerily so. Jamal's footsteps echoed against the concrete, each one sounding like a gunshot in his own mind. He reached the wall, where the loose brick had been marked in the note. Slowly, he pushed it aside. Behind it was a small cavity, enough to hold several cans and packets, treasures in the world of slop. Jamal reached in, hands trembling. The food was warm to the touch, carefully stored, untouched by the chaos outside. A small can of tuna, some sugar packets, a few bread rolls, simple items but priceless. He felt a surge of triumph. For the first time, survival didn't feel like a game. It felt like mastery. Suddenly, a shadow fell across him. Jamal froze. The black rose tattooed man was standing behind him, expression unreadable. Careful, he said quietly. This isn't just food. It's respect. You take it wisely, or you'll pay. Jamal swallowed hard and nodded. Slowly, he removed just enough to carry back to his cell, replacing the rest exactly as he found it. The man watched him, then turned and disappeared into the shadows. Back in his cell, Jamal and Ricardo divided the treasure. Every bite felt like a victory. The gray slop in the dining hall now seemed even more unappealing, but it no longer had power over him. He had found a way to survive, to navigate the invisible rules, and to claim his share of control in a place where everything was taken from newcomers. But Eastbrook was never static. That night, whispers spread through the cell block. Someone had seen a new player watching Jamal. Another inmate, covered in jagged tattoos, had noticed his stash. A test was coming, and Jamal knew it. Survival had never been about just eating. It was about anticipating, strategizing, and acting before others could strike. The next morning, the tray arrived. The gray mush steamed in the metal container, its smell as foul as ever. But Jamal wasn't afraid. He lifted the skin, scanned the hall, and ate carefully, calculating every movement. Around him, men watched, waiting to see if he would falter. He didn't. He had learned the lessons of respect, timing, and alliances. He had learned to survive. Then came the real challenge. A fight broke out nearby. Two men arguing over a stolen tray. Chaos erupted, metal trays clanging, slop flying. Jamal's heart pounded. This was the ultimate test. Remain calm, protect your meal, and avoid being drawn into violence. He stayed low, eyes darting, clutching his tray, waiting for the moment to move. When the dust settled, one man lay bleeding, another thrown against the wall. Jamal exhaled, chest tight, and realized the truth he had learned over the past weeks. Survival wasn't about strength or hunger alone. It was about understanding the system, reading people, and knowing when to act and when to stay invisible. The gray slop, the fights, the alliances, they were all part of the same test. That night, Jamal lay in his bunk, staring at the ceiling. He had survived the chaos, claimed his first stash, and learned the invisible rules of food and power in Eastbrook. But he also knew the prison was always evolving. New players, new rules, new dangers were coming. He had passed the first test, but the real challenge, the ultimate survival game, was far from over. Outside, the prison lights flickered. Inside, the men who had watched him from shadows moved silently. Jamal understood one thing with absolute clarity. In Eastbrook, survival didn't come from strength alone. It came from knowledge, strategy, and the will to fight another day, one gray tray at a time. If this story opened your eyes, don't let it end here. Hit like so this video reaches more people who need to see the truth. Subscribe for real crime and prison documentaries you won't see on mainstream media. And comment below, do you think the justice system failed here, or did it get it right?